Hello there, folks. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from Command Central at the Philanthropy Mastermind series. And more specifically today, of course, this is How to Raise, our weekly show bringing you folks who really know how to raise funds for your charities, your nonprofits. And this is, of course, CFRE accredited. So if you're collecting those credits for your CFRE, I hope you'll make sure to take note of this one. I'm going to be introducing to you both the subject and our guest presenter today. But before I do that, I want to welcome you here and make sure you know how you can interact both with our presenter and with me and with one another today. And that is through, of course, the chat and the Q&A. Q&A, by the way, is a perfect place to include your questions throughout the presentation today so that our guest presenter can address them at the conclusion of his presentation. So please do use the chat, or rather the Q&A, for your questions. But the chat is a perfect place to just say, first of all, hello, and then have a conversation with one another, and perhaps to note anything that really strikes you as we have this conversation today. So let's start that warm up right now. And I can see Daniel has already done that. So thank you, Daniel, for saying hello from Abington, Pennsylvania. So if the rest of you would join Daniel and just maybe saying hello and maybe which part of the country or the world that you're from, and perhaps which organization you're with, all of that would be really helpful to our presenter and I know to one another as we're having the conversation today. So you can go on over to the chat and do exactly that. So I want to say hello to Meg for joining us in that, and Elizabeth from Ronald McDonald House in Seattle, and Keith from Phoenix, melting. I hope not totally melting, but I know it is very hot in Phoenix. And Eve, hello, Eve. Yes, good to see you here from Cleveland. And I know we have many others who will be joining you all as well. Now, I'm glad you're here live. Some people will be enjoying this. Hello there, Garrett and Suzanne. Some of you will be enjoying this as a recording after the fact. But for those who are here with us live, please do make sure you continue doing what Alicia and others have done, which is to use this as an opportunity to talk with one another, share notes and experiences with one another, but also to ask those really critical questions that can get answers from our guest today. And of course, our topic is on culture check, retaining your team and building stronger donor relationships. What is that about, really? It's about gift officer turnover, which is one of the biggest challenges in our field. And the question, of course, is what if the key to retention isn't just better content, but a better team culture? We'll be exploring that extensively today, not only through the chat and the Q&A, but also the recording and the slide deck, which he'll be sharing with you, which will be made available to you after the presentation. Inevitably, people ask, will I be able to get a copy of the slides or the recording? And the answer to yes, to both, if of course, yes, a little tongue-tied today, you're going to see an email coming to you in the next 24 to 48 hours with a link to the recording that we're doing right now, and also a link to the slides that will be shared with you. We also have another thing that I'm going to mention right now, which is that there's a little survey at the conclusion of the presentation. So whenever you leave, and I hope you'll stick all the way through, do fill out that survey, if you will. It will take you no more than 30 seconds, but it's our guide to what to program every single week in this series. So just let us know both what you felt about today, but also what you'd like to see and hear in the future. It's also a guide for our sponsor, DonorSearch. We won't be talking about them much today unless our guest chooses to mention them for some reason, but it's not through any lack of appreciation. If it were not for DonorSearch, we could not be now at, I think, episode 713, if I'm not mistaken, in the Philanthropy Mastermind series. And we do this show plus our other two shows every single week. More on that later. So right now, I'd like to introduce to you, of course, our guest presenter, Ryan Zapolsky. He brings a wealth of experience in fundraising, alumni relations, and nonprofit leadership. He's currently serving as Director of Development at Smile Train. If you don't know that organization, which is fabulous, I hope you'll look them up today. We'll make sure there's a link to that in the chat. He's risen through the ranks over nearly 4 years with Smile Train, previously holding roles as manager and senior manager of development. He's based out of Cleveland, although working, I believe, still remotely, and actively involved in local fundraising community as well as the VP of Communications for the AFP Greater Cleveland chapter. He was also honored by AFP Global as an outstanding young professional just last year. I was very happy to be able to have an interview with him for our podcast series. You can check that out, and we'll make sure to include a note to that in the chat as well. Before joining Smile Train, Ryan held advancement and development roles at Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western, the University of Bridgeport, where he served as both director of annual giving and interim director of advancement, and New England College. I'm not going to go over all the rest. I'll let him tell you more. I'm not going to use up any more oxygen. Thank you so much, Ryan, for being here today and sharing on this topic.
Yeah, thank you, Jay, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody. This is my second go around in the Philanthropy Mastermind series. I did a podcast about this time last year. Crazy how time flies. So wherever you get your favorite podcasts, make sure to scroll up on the episodes in the Philanthropy Mastermind series. You'll find me there. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. Let me see. Got this whole setup going here. Is everybody, can we all, oh no, I have to hit the button. Sorry, technical stuff. All right. Can everybody see? Can I get a yes in the chat if we got the slides on the screen? Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, everybody. So again, thank you, Jay. I'm really thrilled to be here with everybody today. Jay did such a great job of introducing me, but just to go over it in my own terms, I do like to call myself a higher ed dropout. I started my career there, thought that was going to be the future, but then I quickly learned that Spiral Train was the place I needed to be. I'm a staunch supporter of civic engagement, which is what led myself to the AFP Greater Cleveland chapter. I started there as a member, and somehow somebody thought I would be valuable in the communications role, which led to this vice president role. So, if you are a member of your local AFP chapter, I'm sure they need your help. And it's a really great way to multiply that career value in a really low stakes environment, right? So I do want to shout out two of my fellow AFP Greater Cleveland members here today, Eve and Garrett. They're fantastic colleagues, and it really means a lot to put that to see you here. So um, the other thing I like to mention too is I'm a big brother in our local Big Brothers Big Sisters chapter. It's a wonderful organization, and like I said, civic engagement is critical to me. And whenever I mention my Big Brothers Big Sisters experience, I do have to mention and shout out my younger brother. Being a big brother is it's the best part of my life. So, if you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the comments. I've been scanning through. Whenever I look this way, that's me looking at the chat. So I do have it pulled up. I'll do my best to respond throughout. We'll get into that in a little bit, but please do interact in the chat. Let me know where you're coming from. It seems like we got a really great group, seeing some Salt Lake City, Canada, New Orleans. So this is really cool for me to be able to talk to all of you today. So. Next, just want to again share my gratitude to DonorSearch and the Philanthropy Mastermind series. Like Jay said, the slides will be distributed at the end, so I do link it here if you want to dive into the next or past opportunity and catch up to where we're at today. I think something that I've come to understand in our area is that there's so much noise in the professional development space, right? There's a zillion different podcasts, email newsletters, LinkedIn posts. There's just a lot coming at you, and sometimes to me it feels like I'm not actually getting any professional development. So to me, the Philanthropy Mastermind series is a really great down to earth central hub for content. So I really can't recommend it enough. You hear from fellow professionals and colleagues all over the world, and it's a great appointment listening. So. Next up, I want to explain why I'm here today. First off is some reflection. I wanted to evaluate my time as a supervisor through doing this sort of culture presentation. I don't have a team this year, but last year I had a wonderful group, and I'm still, even on AFP Cleveland, I have a small team, which is just as important to me in keeping our culture and our feeling of engagement alive. So to me, this whole thing is a reflection which then led to a story about the beach. It's a little funky, but bear with me. I was presenting at AFP Icon just this past spring. We were doing a wonderful presentation with emerging professionals, right? So people that are trying to find their way, what's the best pathway? And at the end in our Q&A session, a young professional came up to me and she said, I'm really struggling with the work-life balance that I'm just going through in my small nonprofit. It's a small shop. So I said, okay, well, I'd love to help. Can you tell me a little bit more about what's going on? Hopefully we can find a solution to this. And she said, well, my supervisor, she's not so cautious with my time. Once a week, she actually asked me to take her children to the beach. I said, okay. That's a little bit more than work-life balance. Uh, what's your relationship like with HR? How do we stop this as fast as possible? So I I said to myself, culture is really we talk about it enough, but we're still sending our direct reports to the beach with our kids. Something's not adding up. So to me, this presentation and solution is hopefully a way where we can check ourselves at the door. The third why I'm here is just to speak up for those who feel stuck. I see a good group of you in the chat today on this call with us. We're all in different situations, so hopefully, what I talk about today is a way to help yourself. And then last, passion for the sector. I have been a lifelong fundraiser, going through higher ed and now Smile Train. I started my career really in high school as a high school student, as a phone-a-thon caller. So fundraising is incredibly important to me as a field. I want to make sure we're all succeeding and are really, if we succeed, then our donors are feeling the love, which is the most important. So uh, I put my slides a little bit out of order. So we'll love to know, why are you here today? Put in the chat. It would be really helpful for me as a presenter to understand what inspired you to join today. Was it something about culture? Was it just the CFRE credit? Would love to hear, just so I can better align what I'm talking about to what you're actually looking for. So again, put that in the chat. And while you're doing that, I'll kind of go through the expectations for today. So, number one, we'd love to have a discussion. Again, I'll say it one more time. Use the chat. We can have a better engaging session that way. Number two, I'll have some statistics to back up my claims. I think that's really important. Uh, Number three, some fun slides. I got to shout out one of my favorite resources, Slides Carnival. If you ever need to shake up your slides, check them out. They got some good stuff. Funny enough, this rubric is actually an HR template, which I thought was kind of fitting for the topic. And then finally, we're going to have a rubric as the basis for today's presentation. And ultimately, this can be something that I hope you'll take away from the presentation. So looking back at the chat, just to read some things out, folks are here for mostly CFRE credit. Thanks, Darcy. Elizabeth is here. I'd like to hear what other orgs are doing, what's working, culture, retention, engagement. Dana, I have my first direct reports and want to be a great manager. Hey, I feel that. That's really important. Allison says it's important to me for our team to feel like a great, safe, and supportive place to work. Eve says our fundraising team is mostly grant focused, so I'm interested in learning more about relationships with individual donors. And then Keith, one last one, looking at a job that includes supervision of other gift officers, curious about management practices and using metrics to motivate and encourage. All right. What a great list. Thank you all for putting that in there. It's really helpful to have that in the back of my mind as we keep going. So we just talked about why you're here. So I want to tee us up with some grounding concepts for the presentation today. Number one, and I'll say we've heard of most of these before. The content today is coming from my perspective as a frontline fundraiser and a manager of frontline fundraisers, but I think it still can be pretty applicable to other roles. So just want to throw that out there. But again, the first thing that I want to keep in mind is philanthropy is still seeing a loss of talent throughout the sector. Right now, the average tenure remains at just about 16 months. And when you consider the major gifts timeline, right, that's about a year, if you're lucky, to 3 years, if it's dragging on a little bit. Um, so right in the middle, if we're losing our best talent at that 16-month mark, we're going to have to restart all those relationships with a new relationship manager, a new gift officer. It's not really conducive to a fundraising environment. So to me, this is the most important concept for today is if we can keep our talent at our current organizations for longer, we're going to have better donor relationships. which will lead to much more impactful philanthropy. Number two is fundraising is an emotional space, right? When you're dealing with individuals, they all have different needs, they all have different passions, desires, you name it, right? So, um, when you have emotions in the equation, that leads to a little bit of burnout. So, we just want to keep that in mind, right? It's a very emotional space, and we need to keep that at top of mind. Number three, fundraising results have never been more critical, right? We're losing government funding in the US. Grants are evaporating, seems like on a whim. I know the Cleveland Food Bank just lost $1 million plus grant for food just overnight. And there was a nonprofit that stood out to me at AFP Icon this past year where the gentleman was telling me their organization is 80% funded by Medicaid dollars through their patients. So if Medicaid starts to dry up, then they're going to have to completely rework their business model. So all that combined, it's a pretty powerful time to be in the nonprofit world. It's hard to find great opportunities, and the money is it's never been more competitive. So the last and fourth grounding concept to provide today is that this presentation is really both my hypothesis leading to a solution. I don't have a lot of data to prove my solution is working, but again, I hope it is a takeaway that will work for you in the future. So I'll stop here, pause. Any questions in the chat? I'll give it like a quick second before we really start to dive into the content of today. And of course, don't forget, if you have questions along the way that you're okay with waiting until the end, you can use the Q&A function to pre-submit those. I know I like to do that so I don't forget because often I am multitasking and I get it. So I'm not seeing anything in the chat right now, so we'll just keep rolling along. So when I first started to design this presentation, I thought I could just throw a whole bunch of solutions on some slides with some data and say, yeah, just offer more PTO, cut out the busy work, and maybe when's the last time you've had that pizza party, right? Um, and the more I started to think through that, I thought, wow, this would be a really disingenuous presentation and not really in the spirit of we're what folks are probably looking for. Everybody has a different culture at their organizations. They have a different availability of resources, different structures to their team. At SmileChain, we have a dedicated plan giving person, or two people for that. Some people, they just loop that into your current gift officer task. So I wanted to try and best to level the playing field. How can we evaluate our culture as we start to think about it and how we can make improvements, which led to this concept of a rubric, right? So you can see a snippet of it on the right. We'll go through each category that I wrote down. There's 7 functional categories. And the funny story behind this is my wife is an occupational therapist, and part of her workload is they do assessments of children. And one night I was in the middle of doing this presentation, and she was going through these rubrics, and I said, "Oh my gosh, that's it. That's the solution to this culture evaluation. If we can set up a standard rubric with questions and standardized buckets, we can evaluate each other's culture and then start to provide solutions. Because if we just start throwing solutions into the mix, it might not work. You might not be getting to the right areas. So I know the the description of today's presentation said solutions plural, but today it's actually just one, but hopefully one that will lead to a lot of different areas of opportunity. And again, once we get to the end and this is sent out, the example rubric is provided in a Word document. And I think that's really important, again, to reiterate that we all have different cultures, different structures, things like that. So if there's certain questions in the rubric that don't really apply to you, then feel free to make changes, right? I'm not the expert of Cleveland Housing Partners. I'm not the expert of the organization that was listed in Ontario, Canada. So if it just doesn't fit, make a change. I encourage you to do that because you're only making it more applicable to your organization. So let's dive on into this rubric. The first section that I put down is team collaboration, right? Some stats to talk about collaboration. We all know it's important, but let's talk through the stats for a minute. According to Gallup, highly engaged teams show 24% lower turnover compared to less engaged teams. Team collaboration is one of the primary drivers of engagement. Uh, so yeah, right. If you want a tip, I threw one in there. Use a RACI chart. We've been using these at SmileTrain. It's a really great way to establish the stakeholders of a project ahead of time. And if you hold a kickoff meeting, you can have better expectations along the way. So, collaboration is really important, as everybody knows. Engaging with different folks on your teams is a great way to, one, you're delivering better content to your donors and clients because you're having more programmatic support along the way. But ultimately, transformational results don't occur in a vacuum. Elizabeth says, Racy chart is a great idea for collaboration. I will try that. Thank you, Elizabeth. And please throw in the chat any tips that you've had with collaboration, anything that's worked really well, anything that you think could be improved just a little bit. And while you start to throw that in there, I'll walk through the grid real quick, just in case it was a little unclear. The NA column, if it's truly not applicable, you can just mark that down and take it out of your calculation. But 0, it could never be worse end, or it never happens. And then 4 is it happens all the time. We're experts at this. We could teach other places how to do this. It could never be better. So as you start to think through these questions, I won't read them verbatim per slide, but start to think through these, think about where you may land. And I encourage you to be honest with yourselves, because if you're not honest, then it's not worthy of an exercise. Can you please provide the link in the chat? Sure can. Let me see if this should work. Here we go. All right. Yeah, that is the RACI matrix. So would highly encourage using that. It's a great way to go about it. Move on to the next slide here. So the next one, leadership, communication, and support, right? How's that funnel of communication looking, upwards and downwards? According to a study by Edelman's, 63% of employees said that they would advocate for their employer if they trusted leadership more. And then Gallup also reported that managers account for 70% of the variance in team engagement, and employees who trust their manager are 12 times more likely to be engaged, which is a key predictor of retention. Daniel says, I find there's been a growing lack of compassion, human communication with staff. People don't speak to each other and stay connected. Daniel, I love that you bring this up. And I think this goes to both slides, right? Because in order to have collaboration, you need that communication. So something that I've been doing as a full-time remote employee is being really cognizant of how often I'm engaging with my fellow colleagues. I think it's really easy in a remote environment, and shout out to my fellow remote employees on this call, if there are any. Um, it's really easy to slip into that space where you're just not communicating with anybody. So I've made it an appointment, a point to set up an appointment with all of my colleagues on my team, upwards and downwards, every 2 months. I think that's a pretty reasonable time. It's not once a month. It's not, once a week, but just enough time where we have something fresh to talk about. And that certainly doesn't excuse the, keeping up in the middle of that time if you're talking about a certain project or things, but it's just a way where you and your colleagues can sit down, chat, what's coming up, you can prepare a little bit ahead of time, and hopefully it's a really meaningful dialogue. So hopefully that is something that can help with folks who are out there. The tip that I put down in this slide is start posting team wins in an email or instant messaging channel, whether you use Slack or Teams, up to you in your team environment. But I think it's really hard, especially when you're thinking of encouraging communication upward, right? You want to be the start of that change. You want to be providing the solution and setting the standards so that hopefully it starts to become a norm on your team. So anything in the chat, anybody want to provide some examples on how they're encouraging communication and support? Move on to the next slide while you start to type if you have any good ideas. But the next one is buy-in and engagement. So again, you want to have your folks on your team, whether it's your direct reports or the folks around you, you want them to be bought into the mission, right? I think this goes back to why I said I was a higher ed dropout. I could no longer, I didn't really buy into that mission anymore. So once I found Smile Train, it just became so much easier and better as an environment to fundraise. And the tip I put on here is think of an authentic ritual to start with your team, right? I think one thing that we've been doing at Smile Train is sort of this or that game ahead of meetings, right? Where we get to learn a little bit more about each other, and it really came up as an organic activity. Somebody started it, and we just kept going with it, and it's been a ton of fun. So that may not be as organic to your team, but I would say, try to do something that fits in with your current team environment because uh, you'll have way better buy-in if it's something that everybody has fun with. And some stats to bring up buy-in and engagement is a study from Better Up Labs found that employees with a high sense of belonging are 50% less likely to leave their organization, and team collaboration was a major driver of that connection. So again, engagement goes way back to that first slide where we talked about collaboration. And then the second stat I wanted to bring up by good old our friends at McKinsey Consulting. One of their studies showed that employees who feel their voices heard are over 4 times more likely to feel empowered to do their best work and stay. So again, leading back to that core concept of if we can get our employees to stay and ultimately build those relationships with donors, then we're more likely to have that more impactful fundraising success. Eve throws in the chat, our team has a dedicated tea time the days we're in the office. Now that is a fantastic idea, right? Uh, I don't want to speak for you, Eve, but I'm sure that came up super organically, and it's just something that everybody buys in. I know I would be trying to sell my favorite tea flavors. These days it's peach, got to have that in the summertime, but I love a good cinnamon in the winter. So thank you for sharing. And please continue to put your ideas in the chat and we can talk about them and go through them. So the next section of the grid is professional development and leadership growth, right? Giving people those opportunities to multiply their career value. Like I said earlier, AFP is a really great one, and Smile Train invest in my involvement with AFP. So to me, that's really important. Some of the stats that came up with researching this one through LinkedIn's Workplace Learning Report, we found that 94% of employees say that they would stay at a company longer if it invested in their career development. Now, to me, that is, I think, out of all the stats I'll share today, that is certainly the largest one. So I think this slide in particular, especially now as we are becoming, multifaceted in our approach to work. I do a lot with prospect research at Smile Train. I do a lot with working with our vendors. It goes a lot beyond fundraising. And I think the more development and growth we can have along the way, it's just, again, it multiplies that value. The second stat that I found and would like to share is a report by Gartner. They found that employees who experience high internal mobility are twice as likely to stay with their company. So when you're thinking about your teams that you're working with, start to ask them outright, what is that opportunity that's going to be a meaningful way to advance your career? I know last year I was talking with one of my direct reports, and she was talking about events. That was her area that she wanted to do. So at Smile Train, we only have a handful of events per year, so the opportunities weren't as great. But the fact that she shared that with me ahead of time, it then made it easier for me to pencil her into those meetings ahead of time. And she found a lot of value in it. And now she's leading her own event at our main office in New York City. So just to see that type of growth is really inspiring and what it's all about for me as a supervisor. Allison shared in the chat, we play a 5-minute game to start every bi-weekly frontline fundraising meeting. One week it's to see who can solve the most riddles. The other, it's a random chat GPT prompt, 5-minute drawing competition. Excellent. I love that. I think that's a great strategy to use because you're keeping it that 5 minutes, starting each meeting, got a little mystery in it if you don't talk about it ahead of time. I know one thing that I tried doing last year was actually using ChatGPT to create a meaningful prompt ahead of time, more so with problem solving. So my favorite one was how would you encourage a library that wants noise, right? So thinking through that, we ended up settling on a bar that offers vinyl records. So having that vinyl library, that was our solution there. So I love that using ChatGPT as a prompt tool. Daniel says, I had occasional one-on-ones. There was never depth or even the feeling I was being listened to. It was more of checking it off the list. When financial issues came, no one was informed and people were suddenly gone. That leaves scars and undermines confidence, obviously. Yeah, Daniel, I agree. You want to have those meaningful conversations. And I think when you think about culture, right, you think about the two-way communication with that. Um, I think I always try to challenge myself to talk to my supervisor about things that are really important so that hopefully there's that two-way communication. Obviously, not every time it's going to happen, which is unfortunate. And hopefully, when you're evaluating your culture through this grid, you can identify that as an area for growth. And I would say too, if you're comfortable, make sure you share that with your supervisor. Say, hey, I think it's been a lot of me talking at you in our one-on-one meetings. I'd like to hear more of what you're working on, some of your strategies, so I can continue to be the best team player I can be. Oftentimes, I've found that just the matter of talking about it is really important. So, thank you for sharing that. The next slide is a really important one these days, retention and burnout, right? We're hearing about that a lot in not just fundraising, but it seems like everywhere. The two stats that I found that really piqued my interest, one was by McKinsey. They talked about how nearly 50% of employees cited burnout as their primary reason for leaving a job, right? That was way higher than I expected, but I think it's incredibly important in the fundraising space to keep this in mind, taking care of yourself and encouraging your direct reports to take care of themselves because one, you might not know what's going on under the surface, but two, people in philanthropy most of the time I found really love this job, but it can't find a reason to stay. They feel overworked, right? We talked about results being more important now than ever. So finding those meaningful times to talk about it, right? Talk about what matters. Giving those few days off here and there just to recharge are super important. And then the second stat that I found was for millennials in particular, which, shout out the millennials, that's me. Um, a Deloitte study found that 84% of millennials have experienced burnout and nearly 50% left a job because of it. But those who felt supported by leadership were far less likely to quit. So again, 50% seems to be the magic number here. I know at Smile Train we have a really great employee benefit with a counseling service. So that has been really helpful. And also AFP Global. If you're an AFP Global member, there are some resources there as well for yourself or for your direct reports or colleagues. So I would recommend sharing that. And another thing that we've started here at Smile Train over the last few months actually is starting an employee resource group program. So I'm a part of the remote workers resource group. We have a really strong culture of remote work at Smile Train. So um, really all over the world in our organization. So we connect at least once a month just to talk about, what's working, what's not in the remote work atmosphere. I think it's, again, like I said earlier, really easy for us to get in that sort of siloed environment. So um, find an ERG or start one that matters to you. I know we have some religious-based groups at Smile Train, which is great. They found that community there. I know there's a mothers group at Smile Train. So how do work-life balance with that? That's super important, right? So even if it's just the two of you, you're not only providing value to yourself, but to somebody else. It's sort of like the way I describe it is take those like offline chats or lunchtime conversations and formalize them with HR at your organization because you may never know who's out there dealing with the same issues as you. Um, and it's just offering that hand to somebody might just be the critical step they need. So, anybody on the call today, anybody else part of the ERGs at their organization would love to know what other ones are out there because it's really super open-ended. I think another one that we have at Smile Train is Voices of Color. So, um, I think those are the rounding out ones that we have. So they're great. They're really just spaces to think through things. And again, you want to avoid that burnout as much as you can. Moving on to the next section, innovation and adaptability, right? Thinking outside the box, finding solutions to problems. Megan in the chat, we're starting a book club to read conservation-related books. We are a land trust, and not sure if that counts as an ERG. Megan, I would say that certainly does count as one, right? I'm sure it's a select group of people who like to read. And funny enough, I'm actually doing the same thing at Smile Train, but with my donors. We found that a good portion of them aren't as involved in the field of cleft as we think they are. So the book club is our way to engage with our donors, sort of like outside business hours, and just chat over a common, piece of literature, and then we can bring in some experts along the way. So there's my one gift officer tip for you in today's culture conversation. But back to innovation and adaptability. A couple of great stats here. Deloitte coming in again says that organizations that create a culture of innovation are more likely to have engaged employees, obviously, who in turn are 87% less likely to leave. And then PwC rounds it out with 77% of employees that say they're more likely to stay at a company that provides the tools and culture to innovate. Um, Again, going back to what I was talking about, the last slide or the one before, is having those opportunities, right, to have that career impact is super important. Um, the tip that I put down today is find an external expert or cultivate that relationship that can come in and explain a data point or tax law, which is, pretty relevant today, right? So if you can build that relationship with, say, a tax expert, or if you become that expert yourself, that's a really easy way to provide that moment of innovation and adaptability to your team, because they may not be thinking about sort of that critical data point that you found. And if you can share that knowledge with them, you never know where that's going to go. This one was really important to me. And I'm trying to think of a good example at Smile Train right now is, the tax law is one, but we're also talking about a membership program. So just finding that way, again, we're not only providing people a creative outlet in their day-to-day work, but also it leads to some really great conversation with donors. So it's a multifaceted point there. All right. The last section on the grid, and we'll bring up the full grid in a second, but is performance metrics and accountability, right? I always say to my supervisor that fundraising it's a blessing and a curse to have such defined metrics, right? Dollars in, dollars out. Um, And some of the stats to support this one are: a Gallup study found that only 50% of employees strongly agree that they know what's expected of them at work. Those who do are twice as likely to be engaged, which obviously strongly correlates to retention. And another report by Zippia found that 65% of employees want more feedback, and companies that provide regular constructive feedback see about 15% lower turnover rates. Which leads to my tip: don't rely on HR to set your checkpoints. When I was a supervisor of my team, we had, I think it was quarterly check-ins, and our big one was at the mid-year point, right? I like to lead with a no surprises type mentality. I don't want the end of year performance review to be the big grand reveal for the whole year. So whether you're a direct report of somebody or you're supervising a group, ask them what you can do more to have those formal check-ins, because you want to make sure that you're upfront and honest with each other as you continue to go down the path of the year. Especially with dollars raised. I always want to make sure that my dollars that I'm tracking are in line with the organization, because I certainly don't want to be scrambling for that last minute ask anytime. So before I move off into the full grid, anything in the comments about performance metrics, anything that's worked, any creative goals that you're seeing at your organizations? Would love to know those, because I know at Smile Train we have pretty robust professional development goals, which I found was a first for me in the workforce. And it's been great to keep that on my radar as I move about the year. So while we wait for those in the chat, I'll just go again. At the end of this grid, what we do is you then calculate your final score in each category. So if you go back, you can see along the way here the different scores you can give. You total them up at the end into your total category score, and then you create a percentage, right? So at the end, you have this smaller grid, which then you can identify your weak points or even your strong points. I think those are just as important to talk about as weak points, because you want to, think about your strengths. Think about what's working. How can you apply similar strategies to other areas that may be falling behind? So, hopefully, if you go through this exercise, it'll be a really true analysis of what is going on with your team's culture. So, that is the end of the grid. And just wanted to say thank you to Smile Train for allowing me to present Jay Frost in the Philanthropy Mastermind series for giving me a platform to talk about this, and all of you for watching today. So if you go into the slides at the end, you can access what I'm calling the ZAP rubric, right? It's a nice play on my last name. You can click into that there. It's view only, so make sure you download it if you want to make any changes, and you can go through the exercise there. So with that, any questions from the group?
Thank you so much for this, Ryan. And yes, if you would come onto camera for the questions too, in case they come up. Um, and I'm sure they will. In fact, I know one person was raising their hand, so I made a point of sending them a note to let them know that if they had a question or a comment, that it was best to see if they can include it in the chat or the Q&A. And it looks like we already have one that is coming up in the chat right now. Can you see that from Dana?
I do not.
Oh, let me see. It doesn't look like the links in the slides are working. Well, yes, I think that you would need the slide deck itself for that to work, but I think we've put the links within the chat right now, and then you will also be able to click on those directly when you receive the slide deck, and that'll be coming to you in an email in the next 48 hours or so. Hopefully that's more clear.
Yeah, please, anybody, any questions? I'd love to answer them while we're here. I know there was a lot of me talking, so yeah, anything you got, I'd love to help out.
And there's the link to the rubric right there that Ryan has also put in the chat. So thank you for that, Ryan.
Mhm.
I did want to ask you if you've seen department size or team size be a factor in any of these kinds of recommendations, especially when you were talking about not wanting a big reveal after at the annual meeting, but breaking that down into quarters. Do you find that it being in bigger places or smaller places makes a difference in how often you're getting together and having those touch points?
Yeah, geez, I've worked in big and small organizations, right? New England College, we were a team of, I think, seven. And then Case Western Reserve University is a team of, like, it must be hundreds at this point. So,
Right.
obviously, at the bigger, more institutional places, you're working on a really strict HR schedule. And at that point, it's up to you to have those touch points, and it's easy to get lost in that process. So, when you're at the smaller places, it's a little more frequent just in the nature of conversation. So I would say put it in your annual goals for the year ahead of time. Make sure you share with your supervisor that you really value feedback and that you want to ensure that you're checking in along the way. So that'd be my suggestion is just think a year ahead, right? Put them in the calendar so that you're not scrambling at the last minute to start to, find time to do it.
We do have a couple more questions that have just popped up. One is from Daniel, who asked, do you find that many older organizations are resistant to innovative thoughts and actions?
Oh, absolutely. I think a really great example is my graduate school. I went to the College of William and Mary. It's the second oldest school in the country. Um, it was often, it's the William and Mary way, right? Where we do things this way. We've been doing it since in whatever year it was. I want to say 1700s, but that feels wrong. But they've had a process that's worked for them for such a long time, and change in organizations like that is so hard, and you have to put in the time there to really start to make that change. And I think time is often forgotten. People want to see quick change, especially with high turnover right now. We go back to that 16-month average tenure. That's not a lot of time to make change. You're really spending a whole year evaluating and trying to understand what's going on. And if you're trying to make change right away, you're often going to be met with resistance. So earning that credibility is really important.
And Darcy had said, how would you share these tips with your human resources team?
Mm. I think for me, like anything, I would say find a trusted advisor on the HR side. I know I have a dedicated rep at Smile Train that's like my HR person. We have pretty good rapport, and I know he would receive this sort of information much faster and better than, say, if I went directly to the VP of HR, right? Um, I will admit though, she did help put this rubric together, so that's a bad example. But in general, go back to those trusted folks because they're going to be your champions.
Yeah, yeah. Keith had posted here. You might have already said it. How often would you have the team complete the ZAP scoring rubric to be effective?
Mm. I would say at least once a year, right? Or anytime you go through a major organizational shift, maybe you have a leader that leaves, and that's a natural opportunity to start considering change. But again, that yearly cadence is what comes to mind is sort of the what I would recommend. But again, that could be completely different based on your organizational structures, just sort of how your team works. You might have quarterly check-ins even depending on your size. So I would say whatever feels right to you would feel right to me.
It's funny because we just had these two questions that were almost paired together. One is about organizations that have been doing the same thing for a long time, it's their way. And then the other is about, well, when changes occur, is a good time to revisit the rubric. I'm wondering have you found also that sometimes doing this is an engine of change?
Absolutely. I think effective change starts with self-realization, right? You
Right.
you can think something's happening, but until you really take the time to evaluate it and put it down, that's when you can make more effective change, is when you have the results in hand.
Yeah. You also talked about something that we talk about in fundraising a lot, which is about listening to people. And I
Mhm.
have this conversation just with someone just yesterday in preparation for the podcast. It was Kay Sprinkle Grace, who's a name that many of us know. And she was talking about the difference between listening and hearing.
Mm.
And I'm wondering, as you've been through this whole process and thought through it, what are some of the ways, and I know you've talked about this a bit, but just to crystallize it, what are some of the ways that we can not only gather this information, but then really show that we've heard it so that people don't feel like, well, they aren't really taking me seriously, especially because between meetings, a lot of things happen and people may not have heard recently from us that that piece of advice or that request or that suggestion, they may not know it's in process yet. What are the ways that we can show that people are not just listening, but they're really hearing?
Mhm. I think I'm thinking back to like a great example of one of my moments of learning as a supervisor was when my direct reports were asking for better professional development opportunities, and I said, "Oh, just go on the CFRE Education Finder. You'll find something you like." And that to me is a moment of just hearing it. It's going in one ear out the other, and I'm not actively listening to what they're asking for. So, like a half a year went by, and I realized they hadn't used any of their professional development resources to, find an impactful webinar or some course that might have helped them. And I realized, oh wow, my suggestion back those few months ago was pretty bad. So what I did was we added in our performance management software, and you may have these at your organization depending on what's available with HR, but we put that in as a goal with a list of meaningful options. Because, like I said in the beginning, there's a lot of noise out there. So, how do we find the best professional development that will really actually give you the tools to succeed? So, we memorialized it in our performance management software.
Yeah, yeah, that's that's great. Thank you. I want to make sure that people have space to list any last question and just remind folks of what we have coming up on Friday. This Friday, July 18th, we're going to welcome Sydney Moss, who is a young woman who just received a recognition from AFP this year for her work, and she's a junior in high school right now, doing extraordinary things, and she's in the PM podcast. So you can get that wherever you like. And plus, I just alluded to this. Next week we have an interview with Kay Sprinkle Grace, which I'm sure you'll enjoy because she's been in the field for decades and she has a lot to share, especially about her life journey. On next Tuesday, of course, we have the front lines of social good, where we take a weekly look at the trends and stories that are shaping the world of giving. And next Thursday in this show, How to Raise, we have Sharon Papo, who is the CEO of Indigo Skies Consulting, talking about Beyond Survival Mode, 5 strategies for fundraisers in today's uncertain times. They certainly are uncertain. So that's some of what's coming up ahead. And let's just see if there's anything here. And if there is not, I did want to ask you one final question. I usually do ask this at the end of a session, Ryan, which is, if you were going to suggest one thing that people could do in order to implement this strategy that you've been sharing today, what would that one thing be? Especially in places where, and some of the folks in the room have alluded to this, there may be resistance in one quarter or another of the office.
Yeah, I would say be honest with yourselves as you're filling it out. If it's just you filling it out to get a culture sense of what your ground truth is, just be as honest as you can, because I think it's easy to think aspirationally when you're filling out a rubric like this and think of what you want it to be. But the more honest you are with yourselves, the more accurate your results will be, and you'll be able to identify your weak points and areas that are strong too.
Thank you so much for all this. Really do appreciate it, and it's great to be able to work with you in this setting. Really do appreciate what you're doing at Smile Train and what you're willing to share with us here. Thank you,
Yeah,
Ryan.
thanks, Jay. It's been a blast to be on the show again, and appreciate everybody who stuck along the whole way to listen here. It's been a blast to put this together, and I hope it's something you can take away to your full-time work.
I'm sure they will. And everybody who's watching this recording will as well. And I encourage you to share this with your colleagues, because one of the things that we often find here is if we're not sharing, then it's hard to get anything done. And so you're an example of that right now, Ryan. And I know everybody in this room will benefit from that example as well. So we'll look forward to seeing everybody next time. Make sure to fill out that survey. Until next time, take care.